My husband tried to divorce me, not knowing about my secret business. People thought I was lucky to have Jake. Even I believed it once. But they didn't know how often I swallowed my words to keep peace in our perfect little home.
Mom.
I can't find my science project. Ethan's voice echoed through our modernist 3-bedroom house, the one Jake had insisted on buying in the right neighborhood. Check under your bed, sweetie. I called back, finishing the last of the dishes while simultaneously checking an email notification that had just pinged on my smartwatch. Another user sign-up.
The 300th this week.
Jake's footsteps announced his presence before I saw him. Expensive leather shoes clicking authoritatively against our hardwood floors, a sound that used to make my heart skip with admiration but now just triggered a reflexive straightening of my spine. Amanda, have you seen my blue tie? The Armani one. Jake asked, not looking up from his phone. He was dressed impeccably as always, tailored suit, perfect haircut, the embodiment of success at 38. Left side of your tie rack, where it always is, I replied, quickly tapping my watch to dismiss the notification before he could notice. He nodded without thanking me and turned to leave, then paused. By the way, the Stevensons are coming for dinner Friday. Richard just made partner. Not a question. A statement. I have a therapy session scheduled Friday evening, I said carefully. Jake's expression flickered with that familiar mixture of impatience and dismissal. You can skip one session, Amanda. It's not like you have actual depression. Everyone feels a little blue sometimes. There it was, the casual invalidation I'd grown accustomed to over our 11 years of marriage. The way he could make my anxiety disorder sound like a hobby I indulged in, rather than a medical condition I'd struggled with since college. I'll reschedule, I conceded, because fighting wasn't worth the 3 days of passive-aggressive comments that would follow.
Great.
Make that roasted chicken they liked last time. He glanced at me finally, eyes skimming over my messy ponytail and yoga pants with a barely perceptible wince. And maybe wear that blue dress I bought you for Christmas? Translation: look like the trophy wife they expect. After he left, I stood motionless in our designer kitchen, surrounded by all the trappings of success: biking range, marble countertops, Sub-Zero refrigerator covered in Ethan's artwork, and school schedules. The physical manifestation of the life Jake had decided was perfect for us. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the Amanda who existed before Jake. The computer science major with a quirky laugh who stayed up coding until 3 a.m. The woman who'd once been described as intimidatingly bright by a professor. The girl who'd arrived at college with dreams of creating something revolutionary. That Amanda had been slowly erased, pixel by pixel, until all that remained was this carefully curated version. Jake Donovan's supportive wife. Ethan's attentive mother. The reliable hostess who remembered everyone's dietary restrictions. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline, my best friend since before I met Jake. Lunch tomorrow?
Need to vent about work drama.
I texted back a thumbs-up emoji, grateful for the distraction. Caroline was the closest thing I had to a confidant, though even she didn't know my secret. Nobody did.
Mom.
Found it. Ethan called, thundering down the stairs with his solar system model. At 9 years old, he was a perfect blend of Jake's confidence and my creativity, though Jake worked diligently to nurture the former and dismiss the latter as impractical. Great job, buddy, I said, helping him secure a wobbly Saturn. You did all this yourself? He beamed.
Yeah.
Dad said I should have you help me, but I wanted to do it on my own. Pride swelled in my chest. That's awesome. Independence is important. Dad says independence doesn't pay the bills. Ethan replied innocently, repeating what was clearly a direct quote. I bit my tongue. Well, Dad has his opinions. Ready for school. After dropping Ethan off, I didn't go straight home as I usually did. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop 20 minutes away from our neighborhood, where no one would recognize me. This had become my ritual 3 mornings a week, my secret office hours. I ordered my usual Americano and settled into a corner table, pulling out my laptop. Once connected to a private network through a VPN, I logged into the back end of Haven, the mental health app I'd been developing for the past 18 months. The notification I dismissed earlier was indeed another batch of signups, bringing the total user base to just over 5,800. Not viral by any means, but growing steadily organically just as I'd planned. Haven matched users with licensed therapists for text-based sessions, but its unique feature was the AI-driven daily check-in system I designed, which adapted to each user's specific anxiety patterns. Born from my own struggles, built in stolen moments between laundry cycles and grocery runs, coded during the hours when Jake worked late or played golf on weekends. My secret rebellion against the shrinking of my existence. A new email appeared in my inbox. Subject line: Investment Opportunity, Haven App. My heart raced as I opened it. Dear Ms. Donovan, your presentation at the Virtual Mental Health Tech Forum last month caught our attention. Sequoia Wellness Ventures would like to discuss potential seed funding for Haven. I stared at the screen, coffee cooling beside me. They'd found me. Someone had connected the dots between the anonymous creator of Haven and Amanda Donovan, the unremarkable housewife. For the first time in years, I felt something dangerous bloom inside me.
Hope.
When you're invisible, no one thinks to ask what you're doing. So I built quietly, while folding laundry and waiting for the school bus. The email from Sequoia Wellness Ventures kept me awake that night. Jake slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and even, completely unaware that his wife was mentally drafting a response to potential investors. I'd created a persona for Haven's founder, A.M. Davis, a gender-neutral pseudonym constructed from my maiden name and middle initial. My digital fingerprints were carefully obscured, my online meetings conducted through voice modulation software. You look tired, Jake commented the next morning, barely glancing at me as he adjusted his cufflinks. Maybe cut back on those romance novels you're always reading. I almost smiled at the irony. Jake thought I stayed up late reading Bodice Rippers, when in reality, I'd been debugging authentication protocols until 2 a.m. I'll try, I replied mildly, pouring his coffee exactly how he liked it, black with precisely 1 teaspoon of sugar. After he left, I transformed our guest bedroom into my temporary workspace. The laptop came out from its hiding place beneath old photo albums in the closet. 3 screens appeared, connected to a small but powerful CPU I'd built myself and disguised inside an ornamental wooden box that Jake had once dismissed as another one of your craft projects. My phone buzzed. Caroline canceling lunch. Again. Her job at the marketing firm was demanding, and our lunches had become increasingly infrequent. The isolation should have bothered me, but it provided more time for Haven. I opened the backend dashboard. User engagement was up 23% since the last update. The community forums were buzzing with testimonials. Haven helped me recognize my panic attack triggers before they escalate. My therapist on here gets me more than the one I've been seeing in person for years. First app that doesn't make me feel like I'm broken. Each message validated the countless hours stolen between domestic duties, coding while dinner simmered, reviewing user feedback during Ethan's soccer practice, sketching interface improvements in the school pickup line. I responded to Sequoia Wellness Ventures, scheduling a virtual meeting for next week. Then I turned to the day's primary task, implementing the mood-tracking visualization tool I'd conceptualized months ago. Hours disappeared as I worked. The satisfaction was almost physical, lines of code transforming into something tangible, something helpful. This feeling had been missing from my life for so long that its return was intoxicating. The garage door opener's mechanical groan jolted me back to reality. Jake was home early. I quickly shut down my equipment, stashing everything in its designated hiding places before rushing to the kitchen to create the illusion that I'd been preparing dinner all afternoon. Amanda. Jake called, his footsteps heavy with frustration. In the kitchen, I answered, quickly pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. He appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. The credit card statement came today. My stomach dropped. Had I made a mistake? Used our joint account for something Haven-related? Your little shopping habits are getting out of hand, he continued, slapping the paper onto the counter. $300 at Nordstrom? In this economy. I glanced at the statement. The Nordstrom charge was for Ethan's school clothes, purchases Jake had approved 2 weeks ago. That was for Ethan's, And another thing, he interrupted, loosening his tie with an aggressive tug. Richard's wife just got promoted at her firm. She's contributing to their household while still managing their kids and home. Makes you think, doesn't it? The familiar shame flooded through me. The implication that I wasn't pulling my weight, that my domestic contributions were insufficient. I'm sorry about the spending, I said quietly, defaulting to the path of least resistance. We can't all be trust fund babies, Amanda. Some of us have to work for our money. The irony made me lightheaded. Jake's perception of me as a financial burden couldn't be further from reality. Haven was already generating revenue. Modest, but growing steadily. The premium subscription tier had launched last month, and over 30% of users had upgraded. That night, after Jake and Ethan were asleep, I sat in our dark kitchen and made two significant decisions. First, I would meet with Sequoia Wellness Ventures as myself, not as A.M. Davis. It was time to step from the shadows, at least in a controlled environment. Second, I opened a separate bank account at an online bank, using my credentials from before marriage. Then I transferred the latest Haven revenue, $12,347.62, from my business account. Not everything, just enough to start building my own safety net. The following week brought another surprise. A popular mental health podcast mentioned Haven during their Apps We Love segment. Downloads spiked 400% overnight. User support queries flooded in. My carefully maintained double life began showing stress fractures. Mom, why do you always lock the door when you're in the guest room? Ethan asked innocently over breakfast. I froze momentarily before recovering. Just girl stuff, honey. Sometimes mommies need privacy, too. Like when you were talking to your computer yesterday. I heard you say something about server capacity when I was getting my backpack. Jake looked up from his phone. Server what? What are you talking about, Ethan? Nothing, I interjected quickly. He probably heard me watching a YouTube video about dinner servers at restaurants. Jake's skeptical expression lingered before he shrugged and returned to his email. Whatever. Listen, we need to talk about our finances tonight. I'm thinking we need to cut back on your personal spending. As he outlined all the ways I could further tighten our household budget, my phone silently received an email from Sequoia Wellness Ventures confirming our meeting. The subject line contained a number, their proposed investment amount for Haven's seed round. It had 7 figures. Are you even listening? Jake demanded, noticing my distraction. Every word, I replied softly, my mind calculating how much longer I needed to stay invisible. He didn't even fight. He just left the papers on the kitchen counter next to my son's cereal bowl. The morning had begun like any other. I'd made Ethan's lunch, turkey sandwich with the crusts cut off, apple slices with peanut butter, and the chocolate chip cookie I always tucked in with a small note. Jake had been quiet during breakfast, absorbed in his phone as usual. Nothing hinted at the bomb he was about to drop. After dropping Ethan at school, I returned home to find the house unnervingly silent. Jake's car was still in the driveway, though he should have been at work hours ago. I found him in the kitchen, dressed in his suit but with an unusual stillness about him. We need to talk, he said, not meeting my eyes. My mind raced through possibilities. Had he discovered Haven? Found my hidden equipment? Seen the emails from investors? I've been doing a lot of thinking, Jake continued, his voice clinically detached. This isn't working anymore, Amanda. What isn't? I asked, though somehow I already knew. He slid a folder across the counter. I've prepared everything. My lawyer says it should be straightforward since you don't have income or assets of your own. I stared at the divorce papers, my name printed neatly on the dotted line. Emotions collided within me. Shock, anger, relief, fear, like opposing weather systems creating a perfect storm. After 11 years, this was how it ended? A manila folder with sticky tabs indicating where I should sign away my marriage? You're divorcing me? I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's not pretend either of us is happy. Jake said with a sigh that suggested he was the reasonable one in this scenario. You've been distant for months. We barely talk. I couldn't argue with his assessment of our marriage's condition. What stunned me was his timing. 2 weeks before my meeting with Sequoia. 3 days before Haven's new user interface was set to launch. "What about Ethan?" I asked. "We'll share custody, of course. But given your situation, I think it makes sense for him to primarily live with me. I can provide stability, Amanda. Financial security." There was again the implication that I was somehow incapable, just a dependent housewife with no skills or resources. If only he knew that while he'd been working late nights climbing the corporate ladder, I'd built something from nothing. Something valuable enough to attract serious investors. "I see," I said simply. My restraint seemed to frustrate him. Perhaps he'd expected tears, begging, or a dramatic scene that would reinforce his narrative of me as emotionally unstable. "My lawyer recommended I give you some time to find your own representation," he said, checking his watch. "I've been generous in the initial proposal. The house will be sold, and you'll receive 20% of the proceeds. I'll provide support for 1 year while you figure things out." I picked up the papers, scanning the terms. Jake had already divided our lives into neat columns of assets and liabilities. My contribution to our marriage had been quantified and found wanting. "When did you decide this?" I asked. "It's been coming for a while," he admitted, a flash of genuine emotion crossing his face. "Remember the Henderson's dinner party last month? Richard asked what you did, and I realized I had nothing interesting to say. She's a stay-at-home mom, just hung in the air. Everyone else's wives had careers, passions, something to talk about." I nearly laughed. My worth was tied to his social status, how I reflected on him at dinner parties. "I'll look these over," I said, tucking the papers into my bag. Jake nodded, seemingly relieved by my composure. "I'm staying at the Westin for now. We should tell Ethan together this weekend." After he left, I sat alone in our kitchen, his kitchen according to the division of assets, and felt something unexpected. Freedom. The divorce was not on my terms or timeline, but it resolved a problem I hadn't yet figured out how to address. How to reveal my success without triggering Jake's insecurity and control issues. I opened my laptop and pulled up Haven's dashboard. User numbers had doubled again. The feedback remained overwhelmingly positive. The new therapist matching algorithm was performing beyond expectations. Then I did something reckless. I logged into the Haven admin account using my real name, Amanda Donovan, removing E.M. Davis from the system. I updated my profile photo to a professional headshot I'd secretly taken months ago. I was done hiding. My phone rang, the Sequoia investment team wanting to move our meeting up. "Big news," they said. A competitor was entering the space. They wanted to accelerate the funding timeline. I agreed to the new schedule, then called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Meera Patel, my college roommate and the most cutthroat divorce lawyer in the city. "It's Amanda," I said when she answered. "I need your help with something complicated." "Amanda Mitchell? From CompSci? It's been forever." "Actually, it's still Amanda Mitchell. I'm just using Donovan professionally at the moment, but not for much longer." Myra's laugh was just as I remembered, sharp and knowing. "This sounds promising. When can we meet?" "Tomorrow," I said. "And Meera? Bring your calculator. The numbers might surprise you." I hung up and noticed Ethan's lunchbox on the counter. He'd forgotten it again. As I grabbed my keys to deliver it to his school, I caught my reflection in the window, a woman I barely recognized. Shoulders straight, eyes clear, the weight of pretense finally lifting. Jake had no idea what he'd just set in motion. When he mentioned he'd be generous in the settlement, I almost laughed. He had no idea what I was worth. Myra's corner office overlooked the city skyline, all glass and authority. The conference room table between us was covered with documents, Haven's financials, user growth projections, the Sequoia term sheet, and Jake's divorce papers. "So let me make sure I understand," Meera said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "While your husband thought you were browsing recipe blogs, you built a mental health platform currently valued at $8 million pre-money," I finished. "Sequoia's ready to invest $2 million for a 20% stake." Meera whistled low. "And Jake has no idea?"
None.
"He thinks I'm financially dependent on him. His settlement offer reflects that assumption." She flipped through Jake's proposal again, a smile spreading across her face. the kind that reminded me why she'd been nicknamed the shark in law school. "This is delicious," she said. "He's offering you 20% of home equity and 1 year of support while sitting on a potential gold mine. We could counter immediately, but, I prompted. Timing matters in negotiation. Right now, he believes he's being magnanimous by offering you anything at all. The moment we reveal Haven, everything changes." She leaned forward. "When is this wellness conference you mentioned?" "Next week. The Digital Health Summit at the Marriott downtown. I've been invited to speak about Haven's impact metrics." "Perfect. And Jake will be there?" "Not at my panel, but his firm is sponsoring the event. He'll be hosting clients." Myra's smile widened. "Even better. Amanda, I suggest we proceed in 2 phases. First, we accept his initial discovery requests, but disclose only your personal accounts, not Haven's business holdings. Let him believe his narrative a little longer. And phase 2, we time your company unveiling with our counterproposal, maximum psychological impact." She closed her notebook decisively. "Now, tell me about your son. How is Ethan handling this?" My stomach tightened. "Jake and I told him together last weekend. He was confused, upset. Jake emphasized how he'd provide stability with his big house and good job. Classic positioning," Mira noted. Setting himself up as the reliable parent. Ethan asked if he could still live with me sometimes. Jake said of course, but in that condescending tone he uses when humoring someone. "And what did you say?" "That I would fight for him with everything I have." Mira nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, let's make that happen." The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. By day, I maintained the appearance of a shell-shocked soon-to-be ex-wife, meekly accepting Jake's terms in our limited interactions. By night, I worked with Sequoia to finalize funding and prepared my conference presentation. Haven continued its explosive growth. We hit 250,000 users. The New York Times included us in a roundup of apps that actually improve mental health. 3 more investors requested meetings. Jake, meanwhile, became increasingly smug. His texts about Ethan's schedule were peppered with reminders about house viewings and suggestions for affordable apartments I might consider. When I didn't engage, he escalated. "I know this must be overwhelming for you," he said during one drop-off. "If you need help understanding the paperwork, my lawyer can explain things more simply." I smiled politely, remembering Myra's advice. Let him underestimate you until the exact right moment. The morning of the Digital Health Summit arrived crisp and clear. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased specifically for this moment. No more hiding in yoga pants and oversized sweaters. My hair was styled professionally, my makeup subtle but polished. Ethan watched me get ready with curious eyes. "You look different, Mom." "Good different or bad different?" I asked, adjusting my blazer. He considered this seriously. "Good different. Like a boss." I knelt to his level. "Can you keep a secret, buddy?" "Just until tonight." He nodded eagerly. "I am a boss. I made something, an app that helps people who feel sad or worried." His eyes widened. "Like when you help me breathe slow when I'm scared?" "Exactly like that. I've been helping lots of people learn those same tricks." "Does Dad know?" I shook my head. "Not yet. But everyone will know after today." Caroline arrived to watch Ethan, doing a double take at my appearance.
Whoa.
"Who are you, and what have you done with my friend?" "Just finally being myself," I replied. At the conference center, nervous energy propelled me through registration and backstage preparations. The panel moderator reviewed our speaking order. I would go last, showcasing Haven's user engagement statistics and therapeutic outcomes. From my position in the wings, I could see the first 3 rows of the audience. Jake wasn't there yet, but I knew he'd be attending the networking reception immediately following my panel. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Counterproposal filed. Papers served to his attorney 10 minutes ago." Perfect timing. Another text followed. "Break a leg. Or better yet, break his ego." The first speakers presented their platforms: a medication management system, a therapist directory, a meditation guide. Good products with solid metrics, but nothing revolutionary. Then the moderator's voice cut through my thoughts. Finally, we're thrilled to introduce a newcomer who's been making waves in the mental health space. Her app Haven has shown remarkable user retention and clinical outcomes. Please welcome Amanda Mitchell, founder and CEO of Haven Health Technologies. I stepped onto the stage, momentarily blinded by the lights. As my vision adjusted, I scanned the audience and froze. There in the third row, having arrived early for the reception, sat Jake, his expression transforming from confusion to disbelief as our eyes met.
Game on.
The day I walked onto that stage, introduced as the founder of Haven, I saw Jake's expression in the crowd, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. The conference room fell silent as I approached the podium. 100 pairs of eyes focused on me, but only one pair mattered in that moment: Jake's wide, disbelieving stare. The husband who had dismissed me as inconsequential was now watching me command a room full of industry leaders. "Thank you for that introduction," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Haven was born from a personal place. Like many of our users, I've struggled with anxiety, the kind that makes you feel trapped, diminished, invisible. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I continued without missing a beat. But mental health challenges don't define us. They're just one part of who we are. I clicked to the first slide, Haven's user interface. I designed Haven to meet people where they are, to provide support without judgment, and to create a safe space for healing. For the next 15 minutes, I presented growth metrics, clinical outcomes, and testimonials. Each data point represented hours of work done in stolen moments, during Jake's golf games, late at night while the house slept, in coffee shops while pretending to run errands. Our user base has grown 500% in the last quarter alone, I said, advancing to a graph that showed the hockey stick curve investors dream about. And most importantly, our clinical efficacy rates outperform traditional therapy models by 23% for certain anxiety disorders. Questions came rapid fire from the audience. I fielded each one with confidence, drawing on deep knowledge no one, especially Jake, knew I possessed. Throughout it all, Jake remained frozen in his seat, his facial expressions cycling through shock, confusion, and what looked suspiciously like calculation. When the panel concluded, I was immediately surrounded by attendees, founders, investors, mental health professionals. Business cards appeared from all directions. Amidst the crowd, I caught glimpses of Jake, hovering at the periphery, watching this unfamiliar version of his wife navigate a world he didn't know she belonged to. Amanda. His voice finally cut through the chatter as the crowd thinned. He wore his client meeting smile, charming, practiced hollow. What an unexpected surprise. Is it? I kept my tone pleasant, professional. I've been working on Haven for nearly 2 years. His jaw tightened. In our house? While we were married? The same house where you handed me divorce papers without warning? I countered quietly. Yes, Jake. Turns out I was contributing after all. Before he could respond, a tall woman with a press badge approached. Ms. Mitchell? I'm with TechCrunch. Could I grab 5 minutes? Jake's expression darkened at my maiden name. Of course, I told the reporter. Then to Jake. Excuse me, duty calls. I walked away, feeling his eyes boring into my back. The interview flew by in a blur of questions about Haven's origin story, my background in computer science, and my vision for the company's future. I answered each question authentically, no longer hiding my capabilities or ambitions. When I finally checked my phone, I had 12 missed calls, 6 from Jake, 3 from Caroline, 2 from Mira, and 1 from Sequoia's lead investor. I texted Caroline first to check on Ethan, then called Mira. You've created quite a storm, she said by way of greeting. Jake's lawyer has been blowing up my phone for the past hour. What does he want? To delay the proceedings. Suddenly, he thinks there might be undisclosed assets to discuss. Her laugh was dry. I may have mentioned that your company just secured multi-million-dollar funding. He sounded like he was having an aneurysm. Pride surged through me, not just at Haven's success, but at reclaiming power in a relationship where I'd been systematically diminished. What happens next? I asked. We meet. We negotiate. But Amanda? The leverage has shifted dramatically. He's scrambling now. After we hung up, I found a quiet corner of the conference center to decompress. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. We need to talk.
Now.
This changes everything. I started to type several responses before deleting them all. Instead, I called Ethan.
Mom.
Did you do your big speech? His excitement warmed me. I did, buddy. It went really well. Dad called. He said, his tone changing. He sounded weird, like when he lost that big client last year. Did he say anything to you? Just asked if I knew about your app. I said yes, that you told me this morning. Was that okay? That was perfect, honey. You told the truth. He said some grown-up stuff to Caroline. She told him to call your lawyer. Caroline's voice came on the line. Your soon-to-be ex is losing his mind. Called you a snake, said you've been lying to him for years. Rich, coming from him. He also said, and I quote, she couldn't have done this alone. Who's been helping her? Caroline snorted. Like you're not brilliant enough to build this yourself. Typical Jake. I said, surprisingly unbothered. He can't imagine I'm capable of success without a man's help. After promising Ethan I'd be home soon, I rejoined the conference. 3 more investors requested meetings. A mental health foundation wanted to partner on research. A woman approached me with tears in her eyes, saying Haven had helped her daughter during a severe depression. Through it all, Jake lurked at the edges, watching this new reality unfold, one where his wife wasn't just independent but thriving. One where the narrative he'd constructed about our marriage was crumbling before his eyes. As the event wound down, he finally cornered me near the exit. You've been lying to me, he hissed, his composed facade cracking.
No, Jake.
I've been protecting my work from someone who consistently undervalued me. I met his gaze steadily. Your divorce papers just made it easier to stop hiding. The divorce, he said, lowering his voice. We should discuss that. Things have changed, obviously. I smiled, feeling genuinely powerful for the first time in years. Yes, they certainly have. My lawyer will be in touch. As I walked away, his voice followed me. Amanda, be reasonable. We're still a family, but I had stopped being reasonable according to Jake's definition. And we both knew it. I used to wait for his approval. Now I write my own contracts. 3 months after the Digital Health Summit, I stood in the empty living room of my new house, a modern 3-bedroom with large windows overlooking a small garden. Moving boxes surrounded me, each labeled in my meticulous handwriting. Ethan had already claimed the bedroom with a loft space, excited about his command center, as he called it. My phone rang, Myra's ringtone. It's done, she said without preamble. Judge signed off on the settlement this morning. Congratulations, you are officially divorced. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Everything as agreed? Exactly as we negotiated. Joint custody with Ethan, spending weekdays with you, weekends with Jake. The proceeds from your marital home split equally. And most importantly, Haven remains entirely yours, formed with no marital assets, developed independently during the marriage. Jake had fought that last point viciously. After his initial shock wore off, he tried every angle, claiming he'd provided the environment that allowed me to create Haven, arguing that his income had supported me while I developed it, even suggesting he'd given me the idea during one of his pep talks about my anxiety. None of it stuck. The paper trail I'd maintained, separate bank accounts, meticulous documentation of development hours during times Jake was absent, the intellectual property registered solely in my maiden name, formed an impenetrable legal wall. How did he take it? I asked, though I could guess. Like a man watching his narrative collapse, Mira said, satisfaction evident in her voice. When the judge referred to you as a successful tech entrepreneur who developed her business without support from her spouse, I thought he might spontaneously combust. After we hung up, I opened my laptop to review Haven's latest metrics. We just crossed 1 million users. The Sequoia funding had allowed me to hire a proper team, developers, therapists, marketing specialists. We'd moved into real office space last month, though I still enjoyed working from home when Ethan was around. A text from Caroline popped up. Divorce official? Time to celebrate? I smiled. Our friendship had deepened since everything came to light. Initially hurt that I'd kept Haven's secret, she'd ultimately understood my need for a safe space to create without judgment. All done. Come over tonight? Bringing champagne? The doorbell rang, a delivery. The Haven team had sent a housewarming gift, a sleek plaque displaying our company values, with my name as founder and CEO. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters, still sometimes disbelieving that the silent coder in yoga pants had transformed into this version of herself. My phone chimed again, an email from Jake. Amanda, now that everything's official, I hope we can establish a cordial co-parenting relationship. Ethan deserves parents who can communicate effectively. I've been reflecting on our marriage and recognize that I failed to appreciate your capabilities. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished with Haven. Regards, Jake. The old Amanda might have savored this admission, might have felt validated by his belated recognition. But I no longer needed Jake's approval to feel complete. I replied simply, I agree about co-parenting. Ethan's well-being comes first. I'll have him ready at 6 p.m. Friday as scheduled. Setting down my phone, I unpacked a framed photo of Ethan and me from last month's science fair. His project, a simple app that tracked plant growth using time-lapse photography, had won first place. Jake had been surprised by Ethan's coding skills, unaware that his son had been sitting beside me for months, absorbing knowledge as I worked on Haven. Like mother, like son, the science teacher had commented. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Ethan, dropped off by his school carpool.
Mom.
Did the judge sign the papers? Are we staying here for real now? He asked, dropping his backpack in the hallway. Yes to both questions. I confirmed, hugging him. How is school? Good. Ms. Patterson asked if you could come talk to our class about being an app creator for Career Day. His eyes shone with pride. I told her you'd say yes because you're not hiding anymore. Not hiding anymore, I echoed, smiling at his insight. That's exactly right. That evening, with Ethan asleep upstairs and Caroline sprawled on my new couch, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the journey. Remember when Jake said you'd never amount to anything without him? Caroline asked, refilling our champagne glasses. God, I wish I'd recorded his face at that conference. It wasn't about proving him wrong, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it. It was about proving myself right, about who I am, what I can create. To the silent startup tycoon, she toasted. Not so silent anymore. Later, alone on my porch, I scrolled through emails from Haven users, stories of healing, of finding hope during dark times, of communities forming in our forums. One message stood out. Dear Ms. Mitchell, your app saved my life when I felt like disappearing. Today I started my own small business, something I never thought possible with my anxiety. Thank you for creating a space where women like me can remember our strength. Sincerely, Rebecca. I thought about all the women hiding their light, swallowing their words, making themselves small to maintain someone else's comfort. How many brilliant ideas remained unborn in the silence of their compromise. The next morning, I walked Ethan to his new school, my stride confident under the spring sunshine. We passed a young mother struggling with a stroller, looking exhausted and overwhelmed, a mirror of my former self. Good morning. I greeted her warmly. She glanced up, surprised. Morning. As Ethan and I continued on, I made a mental note to add a new feature to Haven, a forum specifically for women rediscovering their voice, their power, their worth. Some revolutions happen quietly, in kitchens and guest bedrooms, in the spaces between obligations. But eventually, they find their way into the light. And when they do, they can change everything.